Lumai. So I'll start with a very quick introduction into Lumai, and then we'll get into a bit more of the technical detail. So Lumai is a UK-based startup. So we're based in Oxford, and the technology that our product is based on was originally developed in the University of Oxford. We have about 2 rounds of funding now, so we're kind of at the seed stage. We announced about $11 million back in March this year. We're 20-odd people, backgrounds in various disciplines, but including a lot of experience in data center and processor. So with people from Meta, from Intel, from ARM, from Xilinx, and so on. And we're developing a AI accelerator for data centers that's based around optics, so optical compute. Well, why are we doing that? Well, I'm not sure I need to go into this slide very much. I think you've probably seen it, that there's a massive demand on energy. I don't know whether these are quite the official statistics, but yeah, you've probably seen them already. So why have we got into this stage? Well, we've hit limits. You're very aware that the numbers of transistors on the chip now has got to the point where you can't fit any more in. You've hit the reticle limit, and we're now putting multiple chiplets in the same package. And that is because we have hit the physical limits within that transistor, so about 14 atoms. Sure, there'll be small improvements there, but it's getting harder and harder and harder. And so the net result is, in order to get more performance, then you need to have more transistors within a package. You need those multiple chips. The complexity of bringing all those together gets more expensive, takes more time, and burns more power. And so there is an absolute limit now, and the net result of all that, in order to fulfill the compute demands that we know about, you then need thousands of chips in a data center, particularly for training. So fortunately, there is an answer to this, and that answer is to use optics to do processing. So if you look at the physics of this, then actually it is much better to try and do the computation in analog. And it's much better to do that analog computation in light, because once you're in the light domain, I'll cover that in a minute, then you can do that computation effectively for free. So there's no energy that's burned once you're in the light domain. So you can make advantage of those, or take advantage of those analog operations. You can do that at very high clock speeds. So the optical clock speeds that you can achieve are very high. We go nowhere near the limits there. It's limited by other factors within the overall system. And then once you've sort of hit limits of speed and parallelism, then you can use other forms of parallelism, for example, different wavelengths. So there's a lot of room, a lot of scope to increase performance, and to do that in a far simpler way than trying to deal with all that transistor complexity and the heat complexity that we're aware of. So how does this work? Fortunately, AI and transformers actually boil down to some very simple and very repetitive maths. So the vector matrix multiplication. Unfortunately, it's very easy to do that in light. So I think in the past, then optical compute had been considered for more general compute purposes. I struggle to understand why that anybody thought that was going to work. I mean, what you need is a very simple structure that you do very often, and that's where AI fits in. And of course, the other advantage of AI is that because it's an analog compute and AI is a probabilistic approach, then you can start moving the power and nudge towards decreased power, increased quantization, and therefore pushing into the probabilistic approach, depending on what you're trying to achieve. So it allows flexibility. So back to the math. So you have your matrix, and so think of this as a membrane or like a display, and the transmissivity of that membrane, you can encode the matrix values in that. You can then encode the values of your vector within streams of light, and then you can pass that through a lens to copy for free across that vector across the matrix, pass those beams of light through that matrix, through that membrane, to do a multiply, and then have a lens at either side to do the summation, and then convert back to electrical. Of course, that comes, and this is a kind of representation of that. Of course, that comes at a cost, and that cost is converting from electrical to optical and back again. But actually, we have kind of physics on our side here, because when you increase the number of vectors or the matrix size, then you're changing the kind of scaling here. So in this, if for example you had if you increased your vector size by 10, because you're multiplying in 3 dimensions, then you can increase your performance by 100. So it's a square law. So every time you increase your vector, you're increasing your performance by the square of that. So the power is linear to the vector size, performance is the square of. And so that's a new scaling law. So the number of operations goes up as the matrix size goes up, and then the energy increases at a different rate. So that's very powerful. My background is in electronics. If you increase performance in standard semiconductor digital electronics, then efficiency goes down, and that's just the way it is. More transistors, you clock them faster, you're using a faster process node, efficiency goes down. This is the opposite, and so very unusual, but very handy for what we're trying to do. So you've probably gathered by now that this isn't integrated photonics, but I'll just hammer that one home. So we're using free space optics, or what we call 3D optics. There have been a number of companies who have looked at using integrated photonics for doing AI compute. Most of those companies I think all those companies now have moved away, apart from some research, into other applications, mostly into switching. And the reason for that is that you just can't get over the conversion costs energy conversion costs that I talked about, and so the way that you get over those is to do more processing in the light domain. So in integrated photonics, you can do that. You potentially do that in 2 ways. So one is you have a very wide vector again. Unfortunately, you can't get the enough of the components on a chip, and so it doesn't work. The chip would just be unrealizable. The other way of doing it is to use more of a systolic array. So you divide your matrix into smaller matrices, and you try and do as much of that in the optics domain as possible before converting back. But unfortunately, when you do that, then noise accumulates, and so you end up with a system that just doesn't work. 3D optics, because we're doing a single multiply in one single cycle, then we don't have those problems. So you get the advantages that are listed here. So what does this look like? We are developing a system that sits on an optical module that sits on a PCIe card, so a standard data center format, and that's a scalable system into a rack scale system. And because we're using existing optical technology, some of that we are customizing. What we're doing is a relatively slow in terms of optics, but wide data. Then it's we can take existing components and customize those to match that requirement. So it's a much easier process for us, a much easier development activity. And so in volume, you can end up with a very significant cut in a reduction in total cost of ownership. And that total cost of ownership is based on components, on power, and on data center build. We can see a roadmap to at least 50 times the performance on a TOPS basis, or in fact a tokens basis, and a 90% reduction in power on an ISO tokens basis. So clearly, this is a representation of what the product would look like, but we have a proof of concept that's in the lab now. So we've had the optical part of this working for quite some time, and what this proof of concept does is bring it all together, electronics, software, and optics into a full system. So this is the actual hardware. So we have the optical core, you can see on the left, and then the electronics and control systems that sit on the right. Now these are currently FPGA based, hence the size, but it's a well developed, it's a well trodden path in order to get from FPGA to silicon. I think the diagram has been somewhat mangled in the slide, bring the slides together, but I can explain the architecture. So on the right-hand side, we have the optical core. So this is the thing that's doing the very fast matrix multiplication. Next along, we have the transceiver. So these are things that convert from from electrical to optical and back again, and then the processing of those signals. I mean, it's an analog process. So we have some signal processing, and then a digital processor. And on that digital processor, we do two things. So clearly, there's the interfacing into the rest of the world and the control, but also we can run some nonlinear functions on that process as well. So there's standard digital processing as well, and so from an outside user, then this looks like any other standard digital processor. So that it may be optics at the core, but if you're writing software, you don't know. You just know that it runs faster and runs a lot lower cost. And again, slightly mangled diagram. But what we're showing here is actually one of the advantages of optics is that we can do processing and data movement, so data processing and data movement at the same time. So what does that mean? Well, it means that we can spread out that digital processing across several chips, and we can spread out the memory across multiple devices as well. So we're not constrained by the same very limited shortfront that you have on a single digital chip, and therefore we can use much lower cost memory. We don't need to use HBM, and we can have more of it. And so we can configure this to not only tackle compute bound applications, but potentially memory bound as well. And so that's a huge advantage that we have by using optics. So let me summarise what we're doing. So we see the future of compute in optics, and the reason for that is that we can do millions of multiply, accumulate operations per second, and in a single cycle, and clearly many per second. So with optical clocks up to about 100 gigahertz. It's very efficient because we can get maximum compute out of every single A to D conversion, and that's critical. And so, with a vector width of 1,000, or a matrix or a vector width of 1,000, we can do it thousands of operations per conversion. And that combined data movement, as I talked about, allows us to spread out the digital processing and the memory and so on. And in fact allows us to have a much more configurable system because it's more of a PCB level than a chip level. We can reuse existing optical components and digital components, and where there are differences needed, then it's more of a customization than a ground-up design. So we're not having to fundamentally do lots of new science around components. It's using existing technology. And because of that, then we don't need to go down that route of lots of complex silicon packaging, or the heat management of those, and so on. And so that brings the benefits that I've shown here. Thank you very much.